We're talking NFL Draft Preview with LockedOn NFL Draft co-host Eric Crocker, who has some great observations. That's coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and happy to have you with us on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. And this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you in part by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. And thank you, folks, for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like our channel. If you're listening on any of your favorite podcast players, we would appreciate a 5-star review if you like what we're doing. So happy to have you with us. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Eric Crocker. He is the co-host of LockedOn NFL Draft, former NFL defensive back. So Eric was able to give me some insight into some of these draft prospects that the Giants might be considering. So Eric will be on the show with me in just a moment. But first, just I want to remind everybody that on Thursday, we're going to be doing a Twitter Thursday. So if you have questions, you know what to do. The information's in the show notes as to how you can get in touch with me. Get those questions in as soon as you can, and I will make sure to include them on the show. Also on Friday, as a reminder, we are going to do a live mock draft. Nick Filato is going to join me to do this mock draft. So it should be a lot of fun. You'll be able to watch that. It starts at noon on Friday. And we're going to do a full Giants mock draft using a simulator. Nick will make the actual picks for the Giants. We'll discuss them. I'll weigh in on whether I agree or disagree. And it should be a fun hour. So hopefully you'll be able to check that out and tune in. And again, that will be on YouTube, but it will also be made available afterwards. We'll have the replay on YouTube. We will also have the audio on all our podcast platforms. So please do check that out. All right, folks, without any further delay, here is my one-on-one interview with LockedOn NFL Draft co-host Eric Crocker. My name is Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if you are watching us on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And make sure you subscribe and like our channel, watching on YouTube, or if you're listening, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. We're with you Monday through Friday, and we are leading up to the NFL Draft. Some exciting times ahead. And speaking of the NFL Draft, I am pleased to be joined by one of my colleagues over at the Locked On NFL Network. He is a former NFL defensive back. He is one of the co-hosts of Locked On NFL Draft, and he is also a co-host of the Locked On 49ers podcast. So he's a very busy man. Appreciate him taking time. Eric Crocker. Eric, thank you so much for taking time for me.
Thanks for having me on, Patricia.
Love that smile. I always love it when my guests come on and they're smiling. Hey, it's the draft. I mean, there's a lot to smile about, right?
Course,
it's like Christmas for a lot of us, right? All right. Well, Eric, you're one of the experts at the Locked On Network about the draft. So I am going to pick your brain about a few things, get some of your takes, and see what you think. Because, a lot of people seem to have a lot of different opinions about this draft class. And I got to start off with the quarterback class. Now, a lot of people think that this is not a strong quarterback class, and as a result, we might not see as many trades in this particular in the first round, given that this quarterback class doesn't really have the Justin Herberts or, the Joe Burrows, the Pat Mahomes, etc. That being said, I mean, do you think that there still might be some movement for quarterbacks, or are you going to say, maybe there might be another position that there might be more movement for?
Yeah, I think definitely might be some movement for offensive line. I think that seems to be a position where a lot of teams in the top 10 need those guys. Now, maybe there won't be movement just because I think it's a rich tackle draft class, I mean, you have really good guys from Evan Neal to even guys like Trevor Penning and everything in between. I mean, Equinu out of North Carolina State. I mean, it just terrific offensive line class that really kind of goes throughout their first round. So let alone the top 10, where I think 4 guys might fly off the board. So I think if teams might be willing to kind of, if there's a guy that they really like and they know I have to nab this guy in the top 10, they might be willing to trade from, let's say pick 15 or 16 to maybe pick 7 with the New York Giants, who have two picks in the top 10.
That's why the Giants can't have good things, because they've got salary cap issues now that might prevent them from keeping both picks. But hopefully they do pick both picks. I know for the LockedOn NFL Draft podcast, I made a couple of picks, which everybody, if you check it out, you will see who I picked. I think you're going to like who I picked. But Eric, let me ask you this. You mentioned that this is a deep class for tackles. It's also a deep class for, I think, edge rushers.
Yes.
What separate, other than grade, obviously, which, every team has their own way of grading prospects, but what separates, do you think, the top players from like the next level? Is there that much of a degree of separation, or is there, are they pretty much on par?
I think typically it's upside, right? Like now, there are some guys that have upside, and you lean more towards that when you draft them. You have some guys that have high-end production, and you lean more towards that when you draft them. But then there are guys that have the upside and the production, and I think that's what separates some of the guys throughout this class or in any class. The guys in the top 10 usually have the production as well as really high elite traits and upside, whereas maybe later in the first round or even early day 2, you find guys that have either one or the other, and there's just a little inconsistencies that they're trying to find to really take their game to the next level. I think sometimes when guys are taken in the second round or third round, a lot of fans think, oh, this guy, if he was better, he'd be taken in the first round or whatever. And it's like, no, dude, like maybe there's just something that there were question marks about. Maybe like a guy like DK Metcalf, he had the neck injury. Some people thought he'd never play football again. That can make a guy drop to the late second round. So I think, as it pertains to guys that are kind of in that tier 1, they usually have both things combined, as opposed to guys taken later. Probably some inconsistencies at other parts of the games, but still have something that's intriguing to the team drafting them.
Now, the Giants are in a kind of a weird situation, one that they've never been in, I don't think, in their history, and that they have 2 picks within a 3-pick range, in the top 7, no less.
Yes.
So how, if you're the Giants, do you say, and especially you have all these needs, you've got edge, you've got offensive tackle, you're potentially looking at needing a cornerback, maybe an inside linebacker, maybe a nose tackle. How do you kind of separate need versus best player available, resist that urge, do you think?
I think you definitely want to get a guy who not just fits a need, but is also the best player available as well. And for a team that needs help at tackle and at edge, I mean, this is strong for both of those. And I think the New York Giants would definitely have a really good pick at guys that fit both areas, and it won't be a reach. So let's say a guy like Evan Neal, he's going off the clock at pick 5. Well, there's Izzy Equinu, and I think he's going to be a terrific tackle as well. Let's say maybe Thibodeau is gone, or even Walker. Maybe they go in the first 6 picks, so you're there at pick 7, and maybe 3 guys that you really like are gone. Well, there's still Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State. So I think with the Giants, I believe strongly in the philosophy of building in the trenches, and everything else will take care of itself. If you have guys in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball that can get to the quarterback, well, that's going to help your secondary, where maybe you do have some needs there, but a guy that can move quarterbacks off of his spots, it helps guys at each level.
All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, there's only one place that has the best information for all the latest odds, contests, player props, and whatnot for all your sporting needs, and that's BetOnline.net. From basketball to baseball, hockey, UFC, boxing, and the upcoming Triple Crown, you name it, BetOnline has you covered. BetOnline.net is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite casino games. Head to the website today and learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, being a former NFL defensive back, let me ask you about the defensive side of the ball here, because Wink Martindale's the new defensive coordinator here for the Giants. He has said in an interview with the team's website, I want defensive backs. Obviously he will take everything, whatever he can get, but he's particularly spoken about defensive backs and why they are so important for him to take. Can you just explain to the listeners out there for pass rush? And the Giants pass rush has been kind of, it hasn't been great. It hasn't been horrible, but it hasn't been what I think they want it to be. Just if you could explain a little bit to the listeners out there why the defensive backfield is so important to the pass rush.
Well, a lot of it depends on the scheme, right? And Wink Martindale, correct me if I'm wrong, he came over from the Baltimore Ravens, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so a lot of it has to do with scheme. The 49ers in their scheme has predominantly been kind of a two high or single high, some Seattle 3, but not a whole lot of man coverage. All right, so they can kind of sit back a little bit, let their guys get after the quarterback, move off spots, maybe spot drop or get to their area in the zone, read the quarterback and make plays from there. So maybe you don't need the best cornerbacks. And we've seen the 49ers, number 6 pass defense last year, number 3 overall defense with Ambry Thomas, who was a rookie, didn't play until late. Josh Norman had to play a ton last year. Diamador Lenore, another guy. Guys that probably most Giants fans haven't really heard of, except for Josh Norman, of course. I know he played for Washington for a bit. But guys that maybe aren't the best corners, but still overall they were able to limit the production of opposing teams. Whereas Wink Martindale with Baltimore, they took a different approach. They would load up on their secondary guys, on their corners, and ask a lot of them. Marlon Humphrey is a guy, he play outside, he play inside. He'd follow guys around. They sometimes put him on the best receiver, depending on matchups. They do the same with Jimmy Smith. They did the same with Marcus Peters and have guys play a certain way. And I like how they had different skill sets and could match up against different guys, and they all played different ways. But he asked a little more of his cornerback. So I think, as it pertains to maybe what he's looking for from the New York Giants, one, he's definitely going to want to keep Bradbury if he can. But two, I think he's going to lean a little bit more on those guys to challenge them in different ways. 49ers, they haven't asked a corner to shadow a receiver, and I don't know how long. The New York Giants, I know I saw Bradbury doing some of that stuff, even against the 49ers. So a lot of it depends on the scheme of the coordinator and how he sees fit, but I think they're going to lean a little bit more. Same with the Patriots, their team as well. They do a lot of matchup stuff. So they invest a little bit more in the cornerback position, whether it's through the draft or free agency, like when they got Stephon Gilmore. So, yeah, it depends on the coordinator and what his philosophy is.
Now, you mentioned that if the Giants could, they should keep James Bradbury. Financially, I don't think they're going to be able to. So, that being said, who are some of the cornerbacks that you think might be a James Bradbury in the making?
Oh, man. He's a legit man coverage guy, and he's kind of came into his own. Early on with the Panthers, he wasn't really viewed as like that guy. But obviously later on, as the years went on, he got better and better and more consistent. Obviously going to the New York Giants, and even without a pass rush, still playing good at the cornerback position, which is tough to do when you don't have a pass. It's tough to do with a pass rush, even harder to do if you don't have one. All right. So a guy that can maybe fit that mold, if you're talking top 10, the guys are Sauce Gardner, who wasn't really asked to do a whole lot of that. He wasn't asked to shadow guys. And there are some worries, I guess I have, because, he wasn't challenged as much as some other receivers. They would play some zone. They would play some off stuff. They would do some bail. I think he did a tremendous job. I think, if you compare him to like a guy like Derek Stingley Jr. out of LSU, well, Stingley playing in the SEC, he was challenged much more consistently. He was tasked with having to cover guys consistently like, Devontae Smith. And not just cover them. You are in man coverage. LSU, they were playing man consistently at a higher rate than most teams. So you get to see a little bit more of what he's made of. And, at times he would get beat. But I think, again, the challenges that they put on him. But when he was on, he was on. So I think if Wink Martindale wants that guy, where it's like, hey, you're going to play man coverage and you're going to follow guys around, I think Stingley might be the better fit.
Interesting. And Stingley's coming off the foot injury, but that shouldn't be a big issue, I would think, moving forward for him.
That's probably the biggest question. I mean, he had a terrific freshman year where everybody's like, okay, this is the number one corner. Whenever he comes out, best corner in college football, all that stuff. And I think from there, he's kind of just continued to kind of take a step back or so. He's dealt with multiple injuries, missed time. I remember watching him against Devontae Smith his sophomore year, and Devontae Smith kind of having a couple plays where he had his way against him. And the response I got from a lot of people was, oh, he's hurt. And it's like, well, he's out there, so how hurt is he? And you have to take that into context. But then follow up coming up this year, puts on that number 7. We all know that's a prestigious number for LSU defensive backs. And, he gets hurt again. So are injuries going to be something that you have to worry about consistently with Stingley? Terrific talent. I think the freshman year kind of set this really high expectations of him. And I don't know if he's quite reached that since then, but nevertheless, still a terrific prospect.
Yeah, and something that the Giants, I'm sure, will investigate thoroughly because, there's an old saying, injured guys are going to get injured.
Yeah.
So you want to be careful with them, obviously, because you want those guys on the field. Also, just sticking with the defense for a second here, I think two positions that don't really get talked about a lot with the Giants, and I want to get your take on this draft class. Inside linebacker, there's a couple of guys, that I think can step up and be, that sideline to sideline rangy type of guy. And then nose tackle, that's a big one. The Giants, even though they'd signed Justin Ellis to a 1-year deal, I think down the line they're probably going to want to add a nose tackle. I thought Dexter Lawrence would ultimately get some of those snaps, but I'm not so sure now that he's going to get them. So let's start with linebacker. Who are some of the inside linebackers that you think we need to pay attention to? And who are some of the nose tackles we need to pay attention to?
I think at linebacker, the first names that kind of come to most people's minds is, obviously Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean. But if you don't want to have to draft a linebacker in the top 10, because they are picking high, or even in the trade back, and you still don't want to go first round linebacker, a couple guys a little bit later, maybe second round, third round, but Chad Muma out of Wyoming, he's a guy that had a ton of tackles, led the nation in tackles, actually. And I think a lot of people were maybe kind of worried about, well, how will he play or test, with the athleticism? Well, he tested extremely well. That's not going to be an issue. So you have a guy who has solid size, who is a tackling machine, and now all of a sudden, tested maybe better than a lot of people thought. So he's a guy you definitely can get day 2. And then my other guy, let me look. I know I have his name written down right here. I don't. But Anderson out of Montana State, I believe it is. I mean, again, you see some of the things that he did from a testing standpoint. He's almost like a clone of like Fred Warner. From an ability standpoint, actually tested better. Ran a 4.42 at the combine. So it's a guy that has a size at 6'3.5", 240 pounds, has the range, has the speed, but he played multiple positions there. I mean, he came in as a quarterback. He played safety. He's played all over the field. He's kind of been the Swiss Army knife. If he can hone in as just a linebacker and continue to develop his game there with his athletic traits, you're talking about somebody that can definitely be a terrific linebacker in the NFL and has all the capabilities of being able to fit the modern day game of having to play in space and coverage.
And what about nose tackle?
Nose tackle, I mean, if you want the big dog, that's definitely Jordan Davis out of Georgia. Now, this is a really good defensive tackle class, but I think for him, I mean, he fits that nose tackle very well. A guy who, weighed in. Obviously, we see how athletic a freak he is, running a sub 4.8, which is amazing for someone that's 6'6", 240 pounds, but also vertical jump. His vertical jump was higher than some of the cornerbacks. I mean, matter of fact, he had a cornerback on his team, Darian Kendricks, who, cornerback came over from Clemson. Cornerbacks are supposed to be the most athletic guys on the field. Well, he almost tested better in not just his 40-yard dash, which is, I mean, Davis ran a 4.78, Kendricks ran a 4.72, but also the vertical jump. He jumped higher. So we're talking about someone who's definitely a physical freak. If you're looking for someone who can be a nose tackle and not just be a two-gap plugger type guy, but definitely kind of has more upside as a pass rusher as well. I think Jordan Davis, he's a guy, but you have to take him in the top 10. I know edge rush is a big position that you're looking for, but he's a terrific nose tackle for sure.
Yeah, so that's probably why the Giants might go edge in top 10, and maybe,
Now,
they've got guys, they, like I said, they added Justin Ellis, who can play that nose tackle if they need to for a year or so. And then they could always go back into the draft next year and pick up some more guys. All right, Giant fans, we have much more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast with special guest Eric Crocker, co-host of LockedOn NFL Draft. But first, with the ever-increasing number of makes and models, there's only one place to find what you need quickly for your car or truck, and that's at rockauto.com. Rock Auto is a family-owned business with over 20 years of offering competitive pricing on thousands of parts for every make, model, and manufacturer. Check out their website today, and don't forget to tell them that we sent you. Write down Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know that we told you about them. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and they ship direct to your door. Check them out, rockauto.com. If you're the Giants, all right, you have pick 5, you have pick 7, you have an opportunity to pick up more draft picks. Which pick are you trading and why? Or is it going to basically depend on how the board falls?
I think it always has to lean on the board, right? Like however your board falls. A lot of people, they kind of figure these, I want to draft this guy here, or I want to trade out. I say you wait, you see what happens. A team might get desperate. So maybe they're really desperate to trade up to pick 5. Do you have someone that you really are comfortable with at pick 7? If so, then go ahead, give up that 5th pick. I think it's definitely a benefit to the New York Giants to pick, 5th and 7th, because now, you're not too far off from guys that are really high on your board still. And it's not like you're moving from pick 5 to pick 12 where you have, a big discrepancy in how you have some of these guys graded. So I'd say be willing to move any of those for the right price. And potentially, someone's going to want to trade up for something in this class.
Yeah, I think so too. And possibly, like you said, offensive tackle, not necessarily a quarterback, because those offensive tackles, a lot of teams do need help on at their offensive tackle spot. Now, speaking of offense, tight end, let's talk about that position, because the Giants are completely remaking the tight end room. They signed Ricky Seals-Jones in free agency, who's a big body, not necessarily, a T1, I don't think, but, interesting. He's a former college receiver. He can catch the ball, but he's not like I guess doesn't have the athleticism as an Evan Ingram did, although Evan Ingram, we all know, had the dropsies and everything like that. That being said, who are some of the tight ends that you like in this class that maybe can fit into the system that Brian Daboll is bringing down from Buffalo, and which is going to probably have a little bit of, a little flavor added in from Kansas City with Mike Kafka?
I think the guy that's going to really jump off the charts to a lot of people is Trey McBride, tight end out of Colorado State. He was a guy that wasn't projected to run very fast, but, they ran kind of this power run offense. But he was the guy that people were getting higher and higher on as the process went. And then he went out and tested extremely well, especially in the 40-yard dash. So I think that's the guy that if you want someone who's going to not just be a pass catcher and have explosive ability, I believe he tested at his pro day 4.52, 4.53. That just happened like today or yesterday. So I haven't been able to confirm all the numbers just yet, but he's someone that not only can be a threat in the passing game, but also in the run game as well. They did a lot of inline blocking with him. I thought he did a terrific job with that.
Couple more for you, Eric. Teams can't fill everything in one offseason. The Giants have a lot of needs. If you're the Giants and you have to prioritize and say, okay, we have to do A, B, C, and D, but we could probably get away with not doing X, Y, and Z. We know the positions they have to prioritize, but what are some of the positions or the position you feel that if the Giants don't address it this year, they can probably afford to wait another year?
I think cornerback, and that's a position, listening to a lot of Giants fans, where they're clamoring for a cornerback like a Sauce Gardner, expecting Bradbury to not be there anymore. They have Jackson over there that they just signed last year, I believe it was. So that's a position, again, prioritize that front. And then eventually you can add some pieces to the cornerback position. And you can do some things just to get by for a year. But you need that pass rush that's really going to help build from the trenches and work your way out. And again, I know I've listened to the Giants fans. They want that corner. And I'm not opposed to doing it, but I would definitely focus more on that front than the cornerback position. And then next year, because there's always guys that are going to be good, and especially with the cornerback position, and guys, let's say they have a really good year, where I feel more comfortable drafting a corner at pick 22 than I would at pick 5 and 7 when I have to potentially pass on a tackle or a defensive end.
And of course, the Giants also have Aaron Robinson, a guy who was a slot cornerback in college, but you never know. They might change him over to an outside cornerback, or maybe they move, Darius Williams, who played for them before he got hurt and looked pretty well. I mean, they've got options there. I don't know, if it's exactly what Wink Martindale wants, but they do have some guys that they're going to bring into camp. All right, now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the big burning questions on the Giants, and that is Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. I want to start with Daniel Jones. When you look at his game, John Mara said, look, we have done everything possible to screw this kid up. We didn't, no stability in the scheme. We haven't given him a good offensive line. The weapons that he had, they finally started to fix that. But when you look at Daniel Jones's game, Eric, what do you still think is missing from his game?
His clock is sped up a lot. And what I mean by that is everything in his mind is rushed. And it all stems from, one, the inconsistency in the run game. Obviously, Saquon Barkley, he's been hurt, kind of banged up, and then the offensive line hasn't played well. So even when Saquon Barkley was able to play, he wasn't really getting much room. So there was so much put on Daniel Jones. And I think it kind of sped up the process of not just his development, which hasn't really happened, but also his mind. Throwing passes before he wants to throw it. That's when you get in trouble. Maybe hanging on to passes too long and not being able to get the ball out of his hands because he's unsure about certain things. I think your owner hit the nail on the head. They have not done anything really to let him be successful. Now, I feel like they brought in the right weapons, but they haven't been able to utilize them, whether it's due to injuries at the receiver position. I mean, they drafted Kadarius Toney, and then he wasn't able to play the entire season, right? Like, he missed games last year due to injuries. I believe it was a toe or foot or something like that. So, I mean, Sterling Shepard, he's got it towards ACL, I believe it was, midway through the year. Saquon Barkley, inconsistent there. So I just think there's been so much crumbling around him on top of the offensive line, not really protecting him. It's just been very bad. And I don't know how any quarterback was supposed to succeed in that type of situation. But when you're the quarterback, you're going to get all the blame because you're also going to get the success and the praise when you win.
And certainly, Brian Daboll taking a big step in that he got with Daniel Jones once he was hired and said, hey, give me some plays that you like to run, whether it be from the Giants or from your time at Duke. And Daniel Jones, he has cut down on the turnovers. That was a big, problem for him, that ball security. But, the one thing that drives me crazy is when he takes off as a runner, he doesn't protect himself. He's not smart when he runs, lowering that head and that shoulder. And I tell you, I hate to admit this, but I predicted he was going to get dinged pretty good. And sure enough, he did. And, hopefully now he learns to lower, to slide feet first. I don't know how hard that is to convert, but that was, of course, a problem. All right. So let me now ask you about Saquon Barkley, because Saquon last year was coming off the ACL surgery. That was reconstructive surgery, not just repair, which is a lot different. He had reconstructive surgery. At times didn't look like he trusted that knee, to make the cuts. Didn't look like he had the explosiveness. How much better do you think Saquon can be now that he's going to be 2 years removed, knowing also that he also had that ankle injury mid-year that kind of set him back as well?
It's tough. Once you start having those injuries, especially when you're having them back-to-back type seasons, like he's kind of had, I mean, it starts to wear on you mentally, and his body's kind of breaking down. And that's the tough thing I remember when they drafted him. Now, I was telling the Giants to draft Sam Darnold. Clearly, that sounds like it wouldn't have worked out either. But it's tough when you're drafting a running back at number 2 overall, and running backs just don't have a long shelf life. I mean, I'm surprised at what's happened with Leonard Fournette. He's kind of turned that corner, but maybe still never live up to that number 4 overall pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars when they picked him. I think Saquon Barkley's in the same, kind of same issues going on there. You're drafted really high to be this guy, and he has a lot of big-time ability. But running backs, you're going to get hurt. It's happened to him. He's had some massive injuries, and it's just hard to continue to come back from that. We've seen other guys bounce back. I mean, Dalvin Cook, he's a guy who was he in the same? No, he was in the Christian McCaffrey Fournette class. But Dalvin Cook, he's a guy who tore his ACL early on. He's bounced back. He's one of the better running backs in the NFL. But again, he's drafted second round. So it's just not as polarizing as a Saquon Barkley. We'll see how he can recover. But again, I think there's a lot going on mentally. And then when people start to doubt you, tell you, oh, maybe you're washed up. Maybe he's too hurt. He's too injury prone. How does that mess with your psyche? I think that can affect your game as well.
Do you think he's more of a one-trick pony? And by that, I mean, when I watch him run, he always seems to be looking for that escape hatch to the outside, that home run lane, if you will, as opposed to really mixing it up, lowering his shoulder and moving the pile inside the tackle. It's almost, I don't want to use the word soft because that's not the right word, but you would think he would be a little bit more physical in there. And that sometimes that lack of physicality also shows up in the pass blocking. So I'm just wondering, do you think maybe he's, a specialty type of runner, for lack of a better term?
Well, yeah, and I think we saw that at Penn State, but he was so special at doing it. It kind of gets glossed over that he's not just, picking a hole, putting his foot in the ground, getting north right now. He was a guy that would bounce things a little bit, but he bounced things and it make guys miss. And we saw that early on with his time with the Giants, where he had some really special runs, very special runs. So it's almost like you don't want to discourage it, but also you could see how sometimes the guy isn't taking what's giving what they're giving him. And I think we've seen that consistently, not just throughout his career with the New York Giants, but also with Penn State Nittany Lions as well.
Well, they got to get him going. They got to get Daniel Jones going, because if they don't, going to be another long year for the Giants.
Well, maybe the start to that could be drafting a guy like Evan Neal. Maybe he can help. He's not going to fix all the issues, but if he could just fix a couple on the offensive line, where now everything starts to kind of come together, you might see a better version of not just Daniel Jones, but Saquon Barkley as well.
Well, on paper, that offensive line looks good, but you know what they say about on paper. There are no trophies handed out in the offseason for moves made. Otherwise, certain teams would be perennial champions of the offseason. All right, Eric, great stuff. Appreciate you coming on. Again, folks, you can follow him. He is a co-host of the LockedOn NFL Draft podcast. They're doing mock drafts right now. So each day you get a few picks. And by the time you view this, you will have learned the giant picks that I made for the guys. He's also the co-host of the LockedOn 49ers podcast. Really great guy. Eric, appreciate you coming on. And we'll talk to you down the line.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us today on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. And again, don't forget to check us out tomorrow, Twitter Thursday. And then on Friday, we have the live show, the live mock draft with Nick Filato, writer for Giants Country, host of Big Blue Banter, contributes to SB Nation. He's all over the place. He's really good. If you're not checking out his work, do make sure you do so. You will not be sorry. Until then, everybody, have a great day, and we'll catch you tomorrow.